I didn't realize cars could deteriorate that badly inside. The car business is a long game. You develop a client base, you figure out a specialty, and to really make it over the long run, you have to do deal after deal after deal. Car brokers tend to try to retire off of their next deal perpetually. So when you get a call to purchase an entire collection, you get a little bit excited. Now, I've tempered that excitement over the years because I found that anytime I get offered a $1 million plus car, often there's too many people involved trying to retire to make it not worth my while. And anytime I get offered a large collection, there's usually 300 other people that have been offered that collection or know about it somehow, such that unless I am the high bidder or get there first, then there's not much to be gained from that either. So I tend to focus on the day-to-day, my GT3 business, and the existing clients that I have, essentially just moving forward one deal at a time. However, I'll still pursue those opportunities because every now and then they do come to fruition. And when they do, it's a nice bonus. So when one of my customers, who's also the Ferrari Club president, gave me a call and said, "Hey, I think there's this vintage Italian car collection down in Kentucky that can be bought. The owner passed away. It's being sold through the estate. Pretty sure it can be bought for $75,000. I was like, okay, I'm listening. What's in it? And he started to list off the cars, except he wasn't entirely sure what was there, but he said, well, it's really just, a bunch of kind of older, obscure Italian cars. I'm not exactly sure, but, I knew the guy. He brought this car to a show. He brought that car to a show. Here's what I think is there. I said, okay, well, get me the full list if you can. So he sent me the list, and I'm looking at this going, all right, there's some interesting stuff here. There's a Ferrari 400i, a Maserati Mirac SS, and a vintage Maserati Quattroporte, but then there's also just a bunch of random stuff, Maserati 3200 GT and a Maserati Bi-Turbo and a couple La Fondas or La Forzas or whatever they're called, and some really random stuff. The stuff that nobody knows about because everybody forgot about it for a reason. And I'm like, all right, I have no idea what the heck these cars are worth because my specialty is not forgotten Italian mediocrity. So I called my friend Dan to help me out with it because he loves that kind of obscure stuff. And so together we put a ballpark estimation on the value of the collection, and we figured, well, worst case scenario, it's probably about $130,000. Best case, it's probably $200K. I'm like, all right, well, this is worthwhile. If I can buy it for 75 grand, I'm going to make the trip. So I talked to the attorneys for the estate and arranged a meeting within the next couple days because obviously if it's that good of a deal, it's not going to stay quiet for long. So I went down to Kentucky to see him. And I quickly found out I was not the only person they had shown the collection to, that there were a couple other people that were viewing it. I wasn't necessarily surprised, but I was a little bit disappointed because I thought I was the first one in. But they wouldn't divulge details, of course. So I had no idea what I was bidding against, and they wouldn't even give me an idea of what it could be purchased for. They said, well, you need to make us an offer. So I started looking around the collection, and it was disappointing, to say the least. Now, while I was expecting mediocrity, what I think I actually found was Ed Bullion's grandfather's estate sale. So I started going through these cars, and there is some junk. But it ran the whole gamut. So there was a 1964 Maserati Quattroporte in pretty awful condition. There was not one, but two Maserati Mirac SS's in decent condition. There's a Ferrari 400i 5-speed, which was probably the pinnacle of the collection, in a very desirable color as well. But it went downhill from there. There were Maseratis and other Italian cars that I weren't even sure what they were. There was a bidder. Does anybody even know what a bidder is? There was a Maserati Bi-Turbo that had been wrapped in camo. And I think it was not to disguise itself from predators, but to hide the rust that you could see bubbling up underneath the camo. there was some random Cadillac or some vintage American car. They all look the same because they're big and have lots of chrome, and I just don't care because I'm not going to put a tiger on the air cleaner and go to a car show. So I don't know what that was, but I figured it was worth more than $2,000. And outside, there were a couple La Forza SUVs in pretty terrible condition, but somebody had cared about them at some point because one of them had a whole bunch of interior modifications and some just gaudy upholstery. There was another shell, I think, for a vintage Maserati coupe, and then there was a wrecked Maserati Cambio Corsa. I don't think there was anything left worth salvaging on it, and I'm not sure that the one inside that was complete was in much better shape than this one either. So it ran the whole gamut of odd and disgusting and mildewy and moldy, but there was certainly some value there. I felt like I was wandering around one of these dealerships like Gullwing Motor Cars or something that sells shells and restoration projects and rust buckets, but this was a guy's old collection. So I took a bunch of pictures, made a bunch of notes, and started getting some ideas together. Now, with the help of Dan doing the research, I found out that some of the cars had some real significance. The Ferrari 400i had won a couple of Ferrari events, and the 64 Maserati Quattroporte was actually a very famous car that had been shown in Europe a few years prior and was like a Geneva show car or something like that. It had some real history. But the crazy thing was, literally only about 3 years prior, it was in perfect condition. And in this guy's garage, it had just rusted, rotted out. It probably didn't run. I mean, it was awful. It needed a complete restoration in just a span of 3 years. The guy probably had health issues, and unfortunately, the cars were stored very, very badly, and they all just went downhill quickly. I didn't realize cars could deteriorate that badly inside. Maybe he plowed the driveway with them or used them as salt trucks or something before he put them away. Now, the attorneys wanted to know how quickly I could move these cars out of here. Because essentially they said, well, you have to buy the whole lot, but we have an offer on this Maserati Merak SS, so we have to take that one out of the equation. I was like, well, that's one of the 3 good cars. Well, no, we think we have that one sold. Like, all right, fine. So I got to factor in the cost of removing all of this junk out of the front yard. It was like an Italian redneck's paradise, but if it was Maine, I would have expected to find washers and dryers and lawnmowers out there scattered along with the rusted out pickup truck shells. So I had to factor in the cost of all this, plus the time and just getting all of the cars out of there. I'm figuring I probably have 5 to 10 grand just in transport costs and disposal costs to get these cars out. I think there's still plenty of margin, and I think for, a week or 2 worth of work, I can, probably double my money on this. So then I got a brilliant idea. I said, well, what's the fun of making money if we can't make something interesting out of it? Because this is a story waiting to happen. This collection is nuts. This is way more interesting than a modern collection of actually decent cars that, everybody and their brother has laying around in warehouses. So I called up Ed. I said, what do you think about coming up to Kentucky for a few days, bringing Rob Pitts with you, and we can be the disposal crew for this collection. And I'll get a camera crew or you get a camera crew, and we'll film a pilot of us essentially discovering this collection and having to dispose of it within a week, because we had a very real deadline that these cars had to be out of there within a certain amount of time if they accepted our offer. Ed was game for the idea because he loves shrewd negotiations. I think Rob Pitts likes selling anything that he can make money on. And so we had ourselves a TV show in the making. So I'm looking through the docs on this Ferrari 400i. And the registration was for a 412. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Well, no big deal. He probably just, switched plates or whatever because he was lazy. So I pressed the attorneys on this. I said, hey, do you have a title for this car? Because the plates that are on it don't match the car. And they essentially gave me some sort of political answer that was like, well, what's with the cars is what's for the car. I said, okay, well, no, I really need to know, do you have a title for this car? And they didn't. I'm like, well, that's a problem. So I started doing some investigation into the VIN in Kentucky to see if it had ever been titled there. It had not. I had Dan help me out with some sleuthing, and essentially it appeared that he had just bought the car, never gotten the title, and decided to just swap plates from a 412 that he had owned because he had never got the title. Why he didn't, I don't know. But essentially, I had to treat it as a stolen car or one with no value. So that certainly changed in negotiations. What was a screaming deal, even at $100,000 or $120,000 for the collection, became not so much at all, because when the one car that was probably half the value of the entire collection didn't have a title, that made the proposition far less interesting. So I modified my offer. And then they said, well, that Mirac SS is probably sold. So I modified my offer again. And I think I got down to about $60,000 because they wanted to know how much the difference was on the 400. I said that probably takes about $40,000 out of the whole equation. And initially I had offered about $100,000 for the whole lot. So I got down to about 50 or 60 grand for what was left of the collection. Of course, it was all the undesirables. I'm like, man, this isn't even good. I'm not going to get a good car to rep out of this whole thing. It's just going to be me getting rid of a bunch of junk. And I figure we'd be down there for about a week, get a hotel, and just friggin' plow through all these cars, make phone calls, and just get them gone. My wife was not a big fan of the idea of me being gone for a week, but I said, honey, if I can make $20,000, $30,000 in a week and maybe get a TV show, not a bad deal. But they had another offer on the table that was better, and they could not produce a title for the 400. And I did not win the bid, and I'm not going to say that I really was sad about that, because that's one of those offers that you put in going, I really kind of hope that you don't take this because I'm not sure that I want this opportunity. The fun of the car business is that it's a long, slow slog, that nobody's going to retire off of their next deal, and that usually when opportunities present themselves that seem good enough to retire on, they aren't, because there's always some sort of a backstory. And that was certainly true in this case. If the collection itself wasn't enough of a backstory, the logistics contained within were enough to make any legitimate buyer run away.
Now obviously at VinWiki we love all of our sponsors, but first amongst equals would certainly be AutoTempest. Not only have they supported the channel for the last 3 years, but they've made some of our favorite projects possible, like Car Trek. It is honestly the first place that I look when I'm going to look for my next car, so these days that's about every morning. So we love AutoTempest, and it does make it easier than ever to find your dream car. They compile all the major listings from all the major sites into one easy search. Their motto is all the cars, one search, and it certainly is a great tool for that. So be sure to check them out at the link in the description below and thank them for their continued support of VinWiki.